Most people recognize him as the friendly, soft-spoken treasure hunter from Storage Wars, a man with a keen eye for antiques and a warm smile. But behind the reality TV fame lay a life so extraordinary it reads like a Hollywood movie script. From the grand opera stages of Vienna to the underground rock scene of the 70s, Gunter Nezhoda was a man of 1,000 talents. But before the cameras and the tragic battle that ended it all, there was a boy who simply wanted to be heard. This is the untold story of a legend. To truly understand the man who would later capture hearts on American television, we have to travel back to where it all began. The story starts on January 8, 1956, in the cultural heart of Europe, Vienna, Austria. It was a city rebuilding itself from the scars of war, using music as its primary medicine. For young Gunter, music wasn't just a hobby, it was the very air he breathed. His father, Otto, was a celebrated baritone at the Vienna State Opera, and his mother, Maria, sang in the chorus. Their home, nestled in the shadow of the majestic St. Stephen's Cathedral, was constantly filled with melodies. While other children played with toys, Gunter was immersed in a world where every emotion was expressed through a musical note. Destiny came knocking early. When Gunter was just 6 years old, he tagged along with his father to the opera house for a rehearsal of Tosca, a dark and dramatic production. He was just supposed to be an observer, a small boy watching giants perform. But fate had other plans. The child actor scheduled to play a silent role, an altar boy carrying a candle through the mist, fell ill. Panic set in backstage. There was no understudy. In that moment of chaos, Otto looked at his son. Gunter was shy, terrified even, but he was their only option. The pristine, disciplined world of Mozart and Schubert was being challenged by a raw, rebellious sound coming from the West. While he dutifully took piano lessons from the strict Fräulein Helga Schmidt, learning the masters, his soul was being stolen by the night. He would sneak out to friends' basements to listen to smuggled records of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. These weren't just songs, they were anthems of freedom. In a city that was slow to embrace modern trends, Gunter became part of the vanguard, diving headfirst into the hippie movement and the youth protests that were sweeping across Europe. At 16, the transformation was complete. He traded the elegance of the piano for the rhythmic power of the bass guitar. It was a declaration of independence. The bass matched his spirit. It was driving, deep, and essential. Inspired by the thunderous sounds of The Who and Led Zeppelin, Gunter teamed up with his friend Marcus Weber on drums to form a band. They called themselves Imagine, a tribute to John Lennon's vision of peace, a sentiment that resonated deeply with a generation living in the shadow of the Iron Curtain. They started small, playing in smoky, cramped clubs like U4 and Flex, places where the sweat of the crowd mixed with the stale air of rebellion. But Gunter wasn't destined to stay in the underground for long. Their big break came when they won a slot at the Donauin Selfest, a massive open-air festival. When Imagine took the stage, they weren't polished, but they were electric. Gunter, with his long hair and undeniable charisma, commanded the audience's attention. That performance catapulted them from a garage band to local sensations. Throughout the late 70s, the band rode a wave of ambition. Gunter, always the driving force, pushed them to tour Germany, the heartland of European rock. It wasn't a glamorous life. They squeezed into a van, driving from town to town, playing in tight, cozy venues where the audience was right in their faces. But it was in these intimate settings that Gunter learned the universal language of performance. He realized that music could bridge any gap, cultural or linguistic. The pinnacle of this era came in 1979 when they stepped into a recording studio to lay down their first single, Freiheit, Freedom. The song was a mirror of their journey, a track filled with the spirit of independence. Hearing their own song on Austrian radio was a dream come true, a validation of all the late nights and hard miles. However, the music industry is a cruel mistress. Despite their local success and the airplay, the single didn't explode into the stardom they had envisioned. It was a hit with their loyal fans, but it failed to break them into the mainstream stratosphere. As the 1980s dawned, the reality of the rock and roll lifestyle began to weigh heavily on the band. The financial instability, the relentless touring, and the pressure to succeed created cracks in their foundation. While Gunter remained an eternal optimist, fueled by the sheer joy of playing, the other members began to falter under the uncertainty. In 1982, the dream of Imagine came to an end. The band broke up, leaving Gunter alone at a crossroads. It was a heartbreaking moment, a silence after years of noise. He questioned everything. Was this the end of the road? Had he chased a fantasy only to hit a wall? But Gunter Nezhoda was not a man who gave up easily. The end of the band wasn't the end of his music. It was simply the prelude to a much bigger adventure. In the autumn of 1983, with the echoes of his first band still fading, Gunter made a decision that would define his resilience. He packed his suitcase, leaving behind the familiar streets of Vienna for Frankfurt, Germany. At that time, Frankfurt was a pulsating hub of creativity, alive with the surging sounds of electronic music and hard rock. It was the perfect playground for a bassist looking to reinvent himself, and Gunter wasted no time immersing himself in the scene. He wasn't just looking for a gig. He was looking for a new sound, a new identity. One of his very first performances in this new city would become the stuff of local legend, a story told over beers for years to come. He was booked to play at Nolan, a small, gritty club known for showcasing raw talent. The room was packed, the air thick with smoke and anticipation. But just as the energy was peaking, disaster struck. A blown fuse plunged the entire venue into pitch-black darkness. The amplifiers died, the lights cut out, and a hush fell over the crowd. Most musicians would have walked off stage, waiting for the power to return, but not Gunter. He saw the darkness not as an end, but as a stage setting. Through the windows, the high beams of passing cars and parked vehicles sliced through the gloom, casting long, shifting shadows across the stage. Seizing the moment, Gunter and his band didn't stop. They shifted gears instantly. Without the roar of the electric amps, Gunter leaned into an impromptu acoustic bass performance. The sound was raw, thumping, and incredibly intimate. The crowd, illuminated only by the ghostly glare of car headlights, was mesmerized. That night, Gunter didn't just play music. He proved he was a showman who could thrive in chaos. It earned him his first loyal following in Germany and proved that his talent didn't rely on electricity. It came from his hands and his heart. Frankfurt continued to be good to him. He found a kindred spirit in Gunter Zakowski, a keyboard wizard known for his experimental work. Together, they pushed boundaries, blending progressive rock with the emerging electronic sounds of the 80s. This collaboration sharpened Gunter's skills, teaching him to weave his bass lines into complex, synthesized landscapes. He became a chameleon, able to adapt to any style, which made him a hot commodity in the studio scene. But the true peak of his European career arrived in 1985 when he joined the Cadillac, a Yugoslavian rock band with a reputation for explosive live shows. They were looking for a bassist who could match their intensity, and in Gunter, they found their missing piece. The chemistry was instant. Together they recorded Walk Away, a power ballad that captured the emotional zeitgeist of the era. The song didn't just do well. It rocketed to the top of the German rock charts, holding the #1 spot for weeks. For a moment, Gunter had everything he had dreamed of back in his bedroom in Vienna. He was a rock star. The band toured relentlessly, playing to packed arenas across Germany and neighboring countries. Fans chanted their names. The adrenaline of the stage became his daily bread. He was also highly sought after as a session musician, traveling between Berlin, Paris, and Vienna, laying down tracks for producers who admired his precision and speed. Yet, as the late 80s approached, a familiar feeling began to creep in. Despite the chart-topping success and the steady work, Gunter felt a restlessness in his soul. The ceiling of European fame felt too low. He looked across the Atlantic, toward the birthplace of the rock and roll culture he worshipped. He heard stories of a land where the highways were endless and the opportunities were vast. He realized that conquering Europe wasn't the end of his story. It was just the warm-up. With a mix of heavy-hearted goodbyes and steel-eyed determination, Gunter left the safety of his European stardom behind and boarded a plane to Las Vegas. It was the late 1980s, and he was chasing the ultimate American dream. But the reality of Las Vegas hit him like a physical blow. The city was a sensory overload of neon, noise, and excess. Coming from the historic, culturally deep cities of Europe, the Las Vegas Strip felt alien. It was a place where spectacle often masqueraded as talent, a city of surface-level glitter that threatened to swallow him whole. The transition was brutal. In Germany, he was a chart-topping artist. In Vegas, he was nobody. The humbling reality of starting over from zero tested every ounce of his resolve. He spent his first few weeks wandering from casino to casino, his ears ringing with the constant chime of slot machines and the mediocre covers of lounge bands. He tried to find his footing, booking gigs in dive bars far removed from the glamour of the Strip. These early shows were demoralizing. He often played to sparse, indifferent audiences who were more interested in their drinks than the man pouring his soul out on the bass guitar. But history has a funny way of repeating itself. Fate intervened again at a small, rough establishment called the Junkyard. It was a dive bar in the truest sense, a place where locals went to forget their troubles. During one of Gunter's sets, the power failed, just as it had years ago in Frankfurt. The venue went dark. The few patrons grumbled, expecting the night to be over. But Gunter smiled. He had been here before. Lit only by the glow of a few cell phones and lighters, he launched into a spontaneous acoustic blues set. He stripped away the flash and played with a gritty, soulful intensity that silenced the room. In the darkness of that dive bar, the indifference of the crowd vanished. They leaned in, captivated by the raw emotion emanating from the stage. That night at the Junkyard was the turning point. It didn't make him rich, but it gave him a foothold. Word began to spread about the European bassist who could silence a room with just his fingers and a fretboard. Slowly, Gunter climbed the ladder of the Vegas music scene. He moved from the sidewalks and dive bars to the Neon Guitar, a popular venue right on the Strip. Here, his renditions of classic rock anthems and his unique melodic bass style began drawing real crowds. It was during this resurgence that his path crossed with Mike Varney, a legendary music producer with a golden ear for talent. Varney saw past the struggles and recognized a world-class musician. Under Varney's mentorship, Gunter found himself collaborating with rock icons like Pat Travers and Leslie West. He was back in his element, respected and working with the best. However, Las Vegas is a city of reinvention, and it had one more curveball for Gunter. During a high-energy performance at the Neon Guitar, his charisma caught the eye of an independent film director sitting at the bar. The director wasn't just listening to the music. He was watching Gunter's face, his expressions, the way he commanded the space around him. He offered Gunter a cameo role in an indie film. It was a small part, but for Gunter, it was the opening of a brand new door. Stepping onto a film set brought back the memories of that first time on the opera stage as a child, the lights, the cameras, the art of becoming someone else. As the 2000s approached, the musician was evolving yet again. The bass guitar would always be his first love, but the camera was calling, and Gunter Nezhoda was ready to answer. By 2005, Gunter Nezhoda had already lived several lives: the opera child, the rock star, the session musician. Yet, his creative appetite remained insatiable. He decided to pivot once more, shifting his focus intensely toward acting. This wasn't a whimsical decision made by a bored celebrity. It was a disciplined pursuit. He signed up for grueling acting workshops, hired a professional coach, and began auditioning with the same hunger he had shown as a teenager in Vienna. He wanted to understand the human condition, to inhabit souls other than his own. His true breakthrough in this new arena came in 2009 with the cult independent film I Am Here Now, directed by the enigmatic Neil Breen. In this bizarre blend of science fiction and existential drama, Gunter played a disillusioned corporate executive. It was a role that required gravity, and Gunter delivered, using his deep voice and commanding physical presence to steal the scenes he was in. The film gained a massive underground following, and suddenly, Gunter was a known face in the indie film circuit. He didn't stop there. He reveled in versatility. In Astro Zombies M4, Invaders from Cyberspace, he tapped into a darker energy to play a villainous mastermind, a stark contrast to his gentle, real-life demeanor. Then, flipping the script entirely, he played a kind-hearted guardian in Ice Princess, proving he could project warmth just as easily as menace. Perhaps his most gritty transformation occurred in the 2014 thriller Do Not Disturb, where he portrayed a weary detective on the trail of a serial killer. This was classic noir territory, requiring a performance that was heavy, tired, and deeply cynical, a far cry from the optimistic musician fans knew. But the crescendo of his acting career was arguably in the 2020 horror film The Haunting at Death Valley Junction. Cast as the eerie innkeeper of a haunted hotel, Gunter delivered a performance that was a masterclass in subtlety and fear. He didn't just say lines. He created an atmosphere, cementing his reputation as a skilled character actor who could carry the emotional weight of a film. But while the motion picture camera captured his movements, Gunter found another way to freeze time: photography. This passion had been simmering since the early 2000s, serving as a quiet counterpoint to the loud world of entertainment. With his trusted Nikon camera in hand, Gunter became a wanderer of the streets. He wasn't interested in the glossy postcards of the Vegas Strip. Instead, he sought out the life in contrast. He captured the weathered faces of street performers, etching their stories into black and white film. He photographed the decaying elegance of old buildings, structures that whispered of a forgotten past, much like the history he loved. His eye for composition was so striking that it couldn't remain a hobby for long. Corporate giants like Microsoft and Ford took notice, hiring him for commercial projects that required a human touch. For Microsoft, he humanized technology. For Ford, he captured the spirit of the American road trip, setting cars against the vast, liberating landscapes of the West. His work moved from billboards to galleries. His first solo exhibition, Life in Contrast, held in downtown Las Vegas, was a critical success. He often compared photography to his first love, jazz, telling interviewers that both were about improvisation on a theme. Whether he was clicking a shutter or plucking a bass string, Gunter was always capturing the fleeting beauty of the moment. In 2015, the trajectory of Gunter's life took its most unexpected turn yet. He was approached to join the cast of a hit reality TV show, Storage Wars. The premise was simple: bidding on abandoned storage lockers in hopes of finding treasure. Gunter, a man of high culture and artistic depth, was initially hesitant. He wasn't sure if the chaotic, cutthroat world of reality television was the right fit for him. It was his son, Nezhoda, who was already a rising star on the show, who convinced him to take the leap. "Just try it for one episode," Renee urged. Gunter agreed, and that single decision introduced him to millions of Americans. Thanks for watching. If you found this story inspiring, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss our next video. Goodbye, and see you again, and see you again, and see you again, and see you again.